Hey guys, I was just thinking about, I've been thinking about it for a while, about the Ukrainian war and Russia and all that, and what's been happening and how long is this going to continue on, and the consequences, the long-term consequences and all that. I think it's actually, up until very, you could say, late last year, I think Putin was actually looking for a way to actually settle with the West. Was putting out the feeler that, trying to encourage the West to negotiate, to come up with a deal and all that. I honestly now think the game has completely and utterly changed. He hasn't turned up to the G20. He didn't turn up to the BRICS. And both those countries would have not handed over Putin to any international court or whatever. At the end of the day, as head of state, he's got diplomatic immunity. On top of that, you've got a situation where he's not taking, he used to take calls from Macron and from Schulz, the German Chancellor. He took from both. Recently, they've been trying to communicate with him, and he's basically just given them the finger. So he's just ignored them completely. He's got Kim coming over, and he's had a meeting recently with, a number of different leaders. Plus, the earlier in the year, I just remember seeing the way Xi and Putin interacted as one was leaving. It just seemed to me that was, normally when you see two heads of state and all that, there's the cordial stuff, the normal sort of stuff, the diplomatic stuff and all that. But here was like two guys that actually had come to some deal, some arrangement, where they'd sort of, we need to work together because ultimately we could protect each other. It's, even though historically, when it comes to Siberia and all that, there have been claims, Chinese claims against Russia, and Russia's got something like in Siberia about 17 million people, while China below is sitting on 1.4 billion. So if China really wanted to move up north, they could overwhelm the Russians, obviously, but then it would be an all-out war. So that's a different thing altogether. So there's always been that uncomfortable feeling, especially on the Russian side. But the recent sort of joint exercises that they had between each other were quite involved, quite warm. So I'm looking at the body language, I'm looking at the behavior, I'm looking at these sort of things, and I'm looking at the way he's just sort of going. He's not even just snubby, he's just ignoring them completely, the Western leaders. He just doesn't want to even talk to them, For him to even consider talking to them, they would have to come in with massive amounts of concessions and stuff like that, things that he's wanted, and he's actually elaborated over a number of years now, what he wants, what arrangements he wants, and what guarantees he wants. And it's unlikely that the current administration in Washington is going to basically agree to those sort of things. It's not going to happen. Simple as that. Biden's just a puppet. The deep state behind him are hell-bent on bringing Russia to its knees, and then going after China. that's there. And this is why I think, my enemy's enemy's my friend. The Chinese and the Russians have come very close together. And the poor neighbor, or let's say the old sort of crazy uncle, Kim from the North Korea, so his family and all that, they were shunned to some extent by both Soviet and Chinese leaders. They tolerated them because it was a buffer state for both of them, to keep the Americans away from, the sort of Chinese border, and also from being much closer to the Russian border in the Far East. So there were concerns on both sides. Having that buffer state served them both in different ways strategically. But on the other hand, they were all, there was a bit of concern with the North Korean state. It wasn't, it was, really something that they had actually left in the past. It was more closer to the sort of behavior of Mao's early days, or Stalin's, or stuff like that. And they had changed, especially Russia after Khrushchev, took a very different direction as they evolved. And, for them, there was quite a lot of differences between the North Korean regimes and Russia, even under the Soviet era, let alone today, that it's more like a Tsarist Russia, with more democracy compared to the Tsarist times. But that's really what Russia is currently today. It's a very different state. But looking at the body language of the way he's been responding and all that, and looking at his recent actions to sort of test his advanced weapons, the advanced cruise missile, which has got a nuclear sort of motor, the advanced torpedo, and a couple of other systems that he's testing and all that. And his willingness to also transfer certain important strategic missile technology, like long-range ICBM technology potentially, to the North Koreans, is both concerning for the Indo-Pacific region, but also quite concerning for generally the stability of those sort of that region in general. It really ramps up the sort of the tension and the instability. Plus, it actually increases the threat from North Korea in that regard. So it's quite interesting. I think he's deliberately doing it. I think he's basically doing it to go, okay, we're going to add to the US's problems. You thought you only had Russia and China to deal with. Now deal with a North Korea that's got ballistic missile capability of reaching any part of the US. So, that really puts the threat to the next level. Because up until now, the only two countries that have got the capacity to hit the United States is really Russia and China. Adding more countries to that, which is potentially they could even do it with Iran. They could do it. The Russians, I think, at this stage are going, you want to destabilize us, we'll destabilize you. And this is why I think it's very dangerous what's happening, this sort of escalation and all that. But when you create an existential threat to Russia, obviously, you're going to push them to do these sort of things, which they wouldn't do normally. They wouldn't be transferring such advanced technology to that. Just take a look at America. Depleted uranium rounds doesn't even provide to many European countries that are part of NATO. And it gives them to Ukraine. So, and other advanced technologies which usually are not transferred to other countries, even friendly countries. There are restrictions, and they're handing them over to the Ukrainians and all that, and other people that are actually causing problems to the Russians and Chinese. So I think it's a bit of a tit for tat in that regard. And I think the game has completely changed. I think they tried to find a negotiated way with the West. They saw that Washington wasn't interested at all. They saw that talking to the Europeans made no difference because they couldn't achieve anything, you know. So they couldn't actually convince the Americans to change their policy. It was really between the Russians and the US administration in the end. And so they've come to the conclusion, well, let's just bleed the bastards. I think that's the strategy now. I think the strategy is, because he's got about 300,000 inside the Ukraine. He's got, and the Ukrainians are running out of troops. They're trying to round up anyone. They're even trying to round up people that left the country. And it's scandalous what the Irish government recently has done, talking about rounding up people. You know, absolutely scandalous. But anyway, that's a different issue. That's for the Irish to deal with. And, you know, if you look at the situation that's happening around the Ukraine, some massive forces there. It's about 350,000 on the borders. Now, if they brought that force in, you're looking at a force of well over 600,000. They could obliterate any remaining forces of the Ukraine and move westwardly and take over the whole of the Ukraine. But then there'd be an occupation power, and that would be costly, problematic, and has the potential of weakening them economically in order to administer that. So I think the strategy has completely changed. They've got their fortifications, their 3 lines, which are very hard to penetrate. And each time the Ukrainians try and attempt and all that, they get blown to smithereens and they lose a lot of personnel and a lot of weaponry that's coming in from the US and Europe. The West, especially Europe, is deindustrializing. You know, especially Germany is just massively moving towards a collapse of its prime sector, which is manufacturing. And so you've got a massive economic decline in Europe that's starting to happen. It will pick up pace, you know. Then you've got, you know, food security issues on top of the energy issues that are exacerbating the inflation and exacerbating uncertainty and, you know, problems in the EU. And at the same time, these countries are, because they don't have the energy to build new weapons, and they're literally using some of their own existing stockpiles, they are also depleting their ability to defend themselves in the long run. And so I think the strategy from the Chinese and the Russians is let them bleed. And I think that's the new strategy. Let them bleed. I think he looks back. Remember, he's an economist by training, Putin, so he's not ignorant about the economic warfare and all that. And so he's sort of sitting back and going, let them bleed. Let's go after their interests in Africa, in Asia, everywhere. Let's, you know, destabilize a whole lot of other regions and put them on the back foot. Plus, let them bleed on the battlefield there, so they just pump in shitloads of US dollars they have to print, which weakens their currency even further and their economic position. Plus, depletes their military capability. And we just sit back, just bleeding them over time. And the Chinese are not going to directly send stuff because the Americans would know. So what do? They're using North Korea as a proxy now to send stuff to North Korea, and North Korea then ships it off to Uncle Putin. And that's exactly what's happening. And that's what all these little deals with North Korea are all about, with Kim and Putin. They're all about, diverting Chinese stuff back to Russia without putting China in the firing line in terms of sanctions. And you've got the other situation also that Kim has actually developed quite a lot of what are called missile systems, rocket systems. So they've got actually rocket systems that actually have got a pretty good capability, like 300 kilometers and 150 kilometers and all that, where the Russians have got slightly longer than that or slightly shorter than that, but they don't really have that intermediate level as many. They do have some, but not as many, where, North Korea, it just has thousands of them. I mean, in one case, I remember seeing in one parade where it was just kilometers of these sort of vehicles that had like 4 or 5 rockets on them, quite large rockets, which have a bit of distance. And that means that they can bring those a bit further back, closer to their border, and still hit the front lines with a lot of effectiveness. That means amplifying the sort of the artillery effectiveness, because this is really an artillery war. It's pretty much a war of, you've got platforms and it's just, bombs. It's artillery rounds and rockets and missiles. They are the 3 main things that are being used up in massive amounts. And they're cheaper to produce and they cost less, especially for these sort of countries that have got cheaper labor compared to the West. And so they're able to produce a lot of that. And it's actually shown how effective that is. Where the West has spent stupendous amounts on advanced platforms, but not enough on rounds. It's only got enough rockets or missiles or whatever to probably last for a couple of months, and then they're out. And that's what they've realized, that, the old type of continental type warfare with large standing armies is back. And Russia's built a military, and China has built a military to fight such war. The US doesn't have that capability, and neither does Europe. And they've realized they're in a weakened position. And pretty much now, the Russians are slowly bleeding them. So initially, this war was started by the West to bleed Russia, but now Russia has got the West on the back foot and is bleeding the West, and they know they are. And so they've decided to keep it going. I mean, for China, it's in their interest, because as long as basically the US-led NATO coalition is being bled economically, militarily, and politically over time, it means that there's going to be less capability to be employed in the Pacific. And also, it means that if there's less, or in Africa, which means that they can work in those theatres, creating more problems for the West, while at the same time bleeding the West in this useless war in the eastern part of Ukraine. And so I think that since late last year, I've been thinking about this for some time. I think the strategy has changed and the Russians are not interested in ending the war because they set up all these defensive lines. They've got the capacity, they've got enough firepower and enough soldiers to win comprehensively, take over the whole of the Ukraine, but they're not doing it. And it just doesn't make sense. And it's why everybody's been scratching their head that they've been so successful. They've destroyed 3 Ukrainian armies that have been built up, and they've only suffered about 100,000. And we know they haven't suffered a lot of deaths, and probably even less than that, probably 70,000. And we know that they haven't suffered a lot of deaths because there are things called satellites, and you can actually see burial sites. And there's not many burial sites in Russia, but there's shitloads of burial sites in the Ukraine. It's never-ending burial sites in the Ukraine. So we know that more are dying on the Ukraine side, and most of the deaths that happened for the Russians were in the early days when they went in thinking that it would be a pushover. And then they realized, the Westerns had rebuilt the Ukrainian army into a more lethal type force with new weapons, with all these javelins and all these, shitloads of weapons. And the Russians were actually hit quite hard in those early days and suffered a lot of losses, both in tanks and personnel, forcing them back to regroup, build defensive lines, and hold those defensive lines, and then build up their forces to bigger numbers and bring in more firepower and more cannons and all sorts of things. And then I think something just clicked in Putin's head and he realized, we've defeated one army, we defeated a second one, and now we're starting to defeat the third one. And they're running out of people. And the West is running out of money and running out of weapons. Let's keep the bleeding going. And the Chinese are going, fantastic, Putin, Vladimir, keep it going, mate, keep it going. And that's what they're saying. And we'll send you dual purpose technology. It can be used for peaceful purposes. And any other stuff, we'll send it via our dear friend Kim from, we'll send it to Pyongyang, and he can send it across to Mother Russia, and from there, the long Siberian train can send it to the western part of the country. So that's what's happening, guys. That is what's happening. And the game has changed. The game is basically, you tried to bleed us, we're going to bleed you. And I think that's really what it is. I don't think all these people that are saying, we should try and actually negotiate with Putin, he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't want to negotiate. He's not interested. I think he's over that. He tried, he failed, and then he realized these people want to continue. And they've lost a lot of resources, and I'm not too bad. My economy's not too bad. I've made quite a bit of money through selling oil and gas via other countries, third countries, like India in particular, the oil, or via the Saudis, by actually selling to the Saudis, so the Saudis can then sell all theirs, but at a lower cost, so it's a benefit to the Saudis, a lot of their refined stuff, but they find a market that's willing to work with them, and all these sort of things. And I'm going, yeah, I think he's changed his strategy, his political strategy, that is. His military strategy was to try and negotiate. Then he realized that there was no negotiation. So he decided, why finish this? Let's bleed them. And I know, and from previous year, he kept some contact with the West, and then all of a sudden, after that meeting with Xi in Moscow, he wasn't interested in talking to anyone after that. And I think that is when the deal was done, this long-term deal and agreement. So that's what really happened in that meeting. And I think it was a very long meeting. And I think they really sat down and talked about a lot of these things and talked about their common interests, their common, concerns in terms of the West, the US in particular. And I think they sat down and had a really interesting, detailed conversation about the economics of Russia and China, the strategic posture of both countries, their ability to deal with the West, militarily, that is, how they should use proxy conflicts in a more effective way. And we can see that happening in Africa, where the Chinese and the Russians are working very close with each other to basically weaken US and France in particular in West Africa. And so we can see these things happening, and it's quite clear that the game has changed radically. It's not the same game. They don't want an agreement with the West anymore. They want to bleed the West. They're going to use instability, proxy wars, and proxy governments to cause no end of grief for the West, and in particular the US, going forward. So, the old politics is gone. People need to realize that. We do not have the old politics anymore. You just have to listen to Lavrov as well, the foreign minister of Russia, when he goes around how he talks. He talks to those who are his friends, and pretty much the West he just ignores. He has complete and utter contempt. What do they say? Who cares? You can see for certain events that happen, even in the UN or whatever, doesn't even turn up, doesn't even care. And that's quite clear that it's like they're saying, you've got your own rules-based system. We don't care about it. We don't give a shit. You're irrelevant to us. We are this massive Eurasian bloc, together with a lot of the Southeast Asia that's come with us. Subcontinent is India's going to be like that. It's going to have its foot in both camps and basically extract benefits from both. They're going to do that. So, and that's fine for Russia because they don't care. They're not going to be hostile. They're going to be basically transacting with both. They're actually a great poor way of getting some Russian goods out of India into other parts of the world. So for them, it works quite well in that regard. And then you've got Africa, which to a large extent has surprised me. The Middle East has also surprised me, how so many Middle Eastern countries have basically said, who? Biden? Who's that guy? And sort of just turned around. I mean, the Iranian and Saudi deal, quite shocking. These people have been at each other's throats for decades, well, for hundreds of years, to be more precise. And now all of a sudden, China brokers a peace between them. As I said, the game has changed. And you can actually see all these countries, even in Africa, sort of shifting. I mean, even Israel, I'm quite shocked, even Israel is becoming far more uninterested in listening to Uncle Sam anymore. So the level of friction between the two has increased quite a bit, and will increase, because you've basically got part of a minority in the Jewish electorate who is woke, and then you've got another group which is the old sort of left-wing Zionist, and that's a minority because, you know, you got the Orthodox Jews that are breeding much faster. They're having more bigger families, more kids. And there are a number of immigrants that have come in from Russia, and immigrants have come in from parts of Africa, Jews, or other parts of Asia. And these people are much more conservative, vote for more of the religious parties and all that, and pretty much they're not interested in being as westernized. So the old Zionists who created the state of Israel are starting to become a minority within the country that they created. And so even Israel is changing and shifting and going eastward to some extent. Hasn't gone completely yet, and it won't go for decades, but it is basically putting its other paw in the other camp and testing the waters. So, you know, they are not 100% solid in that regard as they used to be. And it's the same thing with a number of European countries, you know, in their own deep states, within Germany, Italy, all these sort of countries, they're thinking about it. You know, they're looking and they're going, you got a declining empire here with a guy who can't even work out where he is most of the time, who's, you know, just got dementia, and the woke agenda, which really just they don't like. Many of these countries don't like. They're more traditional. Even some of the European countries, like in Southern Europe and a few other, and especially in Eastern Europe, are very traditional. They're not, you know, they don't want this shit. You know, they don't want the Soros of this world, the Bill Gates, the Larry Finn from BlackRock pushing their agenda, their ESG bullshit and all that sort of stuff onto these people. And so even these people are starting to turn on the US. As I said, obviously, if somebody like Trump was to get back into power, possibly he's not going to fix things, could salvage something out of it, but I don't think even he could actually really. There's too much damage has already been done. Let's put it this way. I think there has been severe damage done and erosion of the West, and it's continuing. And by the time Biden is out and the problem is that potentially the Democrats could still win the next election. You know, it doesn't mean they're going to do it necessarily in the most legal way. Remember, they are dumping a lot of people in from other parts of the world, trying to, you know, who knows? Biden may even give them citizenship, do a special, you know, sign a special document and give them, because I think he can as a president. And then you've got potentially you could have millions of people, extra voters, which would definitely change the balance of power in favor of the globalists. And so, you know, this will escalate even worse. And I think down deep, Putin understands that. And that is why he's getting on the front foot and going, I'm going to basically exacerbate this. I'm going to really push it and push them and weaken them, because the faster we weaken them, the less we have to deal with them in the future. And I think that's the thinking. So I think the 2020 election was actually more important for America than the Americans realize. I think they're starting to realize it now, that the acceleration of the decline happened because of the crazies in the deep state around the Democratic Party. And these ideologues, you know, it reminds me of the old Soviet era ideologues. They're just as bad, just as destructive. Or the lunatics, you know, the old Mao, where he was in power, and he started his own cultural revolution against his own party, against many of his own people, So he thought that these guys are not, they need to be cleared out. We need to basically be even more radical. And it's the same sort of thing. You hear the nonsense with ESG, gender stuff, and all this. We have to be push even harder on this. We have to be even more radical on this sort of stuff. And the agenda from the left, and you can see from the Democratic National Convention how they're going after JFK Jr., all these sort of things. These people, I don't think conservatives in America realize that the left has already started a war against them. I don't think they get it. This is a cultural war that they've actually started, and it will go hot at some point. And I don't think they've really understood this. And if the conservatives are not careful, in the not too distant future, they could find themselves a minority in their own country, and potentially even in camps, even basically having their freedom limited. People, and the problem is that you've still got a lot of woke people in basically the Republican Party as well, because the Republican Party is very divided. Ultimately, I think that what has to happen is a break. Pretty much people that are around Trump or people like that. And I don't think even Trump, while he's got some okay views on a number of things, I don't think he's got all the solutions. There's a few people there that have got a few solutions as well. I think they need to work together. I think their conflict amongst themselves, who gets the chance to go after Biden in the next elections, I think that game is a losing game long term. I think these people need to basically get together and start pushing really hard to really change the mindset in the US of the people and start getting the people out. A bit like the left did in the past, used to, like the Vietnam War and all that, used to bring millions out and all that sort of stuff. How about the American right, people of the Conservative Party, thousands, head down to the borders and protect your own borders and stop those people coming through. Just a thought, but you could, and there's enough wealthy people within the party who could basically provide some of the financial support for something like that. That will galvanize people and galvanize, because you've got the right to bear arms, and you've got the right to defend your borders. And if the government's not going to do it, you might as well do it yourself. So you've got the chance to change the direction of your own country. But if you leave the left to run right over you, what they're going to do is they're going to basically destroy the place. They're going to wreck it so bad that, things will go to shit. Just look at what's happening in Canada. Canada is your future. Authoritarianism. I mean, 70% of the people up there are woke. They're going to vote that lunatic, that World Economic Forum lunatic, back into power. You wait and see. The media with him. Everybody's with him. That's why some people are leaving Canada. I remember seeing this lady, Serbian, she wants to go back to Serbia, and a number of other people. There's like a waiting list in Serbia because they can't get enough people processed that want to leave the Canada, go elsewhere. And they're trying to get back to Eastern Europe and places like that, people that have left those areas and they can't get back into those countries because, the processing is very much delayed. The West is going, you Yeah, and you have to take a look at Australia, where it's going to the dogs, Canada, the US, UK. It's going to the dogs. And unless conservative people stand up and stop this shit and say enough is enough and start going to rallies, rallies against these crazies and rallies against, the sort of stuff they're doing in schools, all these sort of things. And we should have been doing this a long time ago. We allowed these crazies to dominate the education and brainwash the youth, and that's the problem, because they've already brainwashed a couple of generations, at least 1.5 generations, if not 2, depending on the country. That's why it's so hard at the moment. And that's why they're pushing so hard that they can, because they've got so many brainwashed idiots out there as their stormtroopers doing their bidding. And that's what's actually happened. The problem is most conservative people don't want to rock the boat because they believe, I want to, follow the rules. I want to, live within the rules and all that. Well, the other guys aren't. Have you got that? The other guys are not following the rules. They don't give a shit in that regard. And I'm not saying violence. I'm saying peacefully take action, but you need to do it in vast numbers. You need to organize yourselves through your churches, through all this sort of stuff, and start doing things. Stop sitting on your friggin' asses and start getting out there and doing things, because it's not going to happen on its own. And don't expect a couple of conservatives to basically fix everything, or Trump to fix everything. That's not going to happen. Trump is as strong as the people that support him. Without enough people at the base to support him, he's nothing as well. He can't do much without enough support at the base. If you don't get out there to talk to people, if you don't get out there to do actions, protest, and start basically demanding differences and changes, and the protection of the First Amendment. There's small little groups here that are doing a bit of that, but I don't see like millions of Americans out there with big banners defending the First Amendment. I don't see a whole lot of millions of people out there with banners, opposing this neo-Marxist, Fabian socialist gender agenda and ESG. Where are the protests by the conservatives against ESG? Nowhere to be heard. It's because BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are basically providing money to a lot of the Republican politicians. That's why. And they've sold their soul to the devil and sold out their own constituency. Those people all need to go. You need to clear house. If you vote for an existing Republican, you're an idiot. If you vote for any existing, you need to call them and find out what have they been saying. And if they've basically been saying shit, you need to vote them out. You need to clear out all those Republicans. And you need to organize in your churches, your local communities, and everywhere, because at the next elections, not only the presidential elections, but also, because remember, you've got separation of power. You've got Congress, you've got President, Congress, and Senate, and the judiciary. You've got these different bodies. Even if you lose one of the bodies, if you can hold on to the others and win more people in the others, you can still prevent these assholes from taking over. So you've got to think smart, Yes, okay, these guys are flooding in. But remember, they're flooding in people in certain parts. Those people, luckily, are going to places which are dominated by these characters. They're going to California, they're going to New York, and some of the actual Republican governors are doing the right thing, very smart, pushing these people into those areas. So to force them into those areas, which is a very smart thing, because that minimizes these characters' effect on the politics and the voting and all that. Now you guys have to up your game. Really important. Because, democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech and stuff like that are worth fighting for. A lot of people have shed their blood over decades and decades to basically defend those things. And you guys are just giving it away. It's about time you stepped up. We really, all of us, have to step up and stop this. We just can't hide away in our own cave and say, I don't want to be, don't give a shit about this. It's crazy. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Well, if you do that, you may end up, your world around you change and you're in a Soviet system and you go, what the hell just happened? And then it's too late, because then you'll be in a re-education camp. You can't escape the society. Get it through your heads. You cannot escape the society. You are part of society. This whole notion bullshit that I hear sometimes in the conservative side is, this uber individualism and sort of it's nonsense. We are still part of a community. We still are part of a collective community, and we still have responsibilities as citizens of that community. If we're going to defend our rights to be able to live our lives the way we want to and things like that, and to be able to express ourselves, we need to have strong community that has the same values as us. For the community to have the same values and defend those values, we need to build those communities. They don't build themselves out of nothing or magically, So doing that is not going to do it. I don't care how good a magician you are, not going to do it. So we need to change our community, because this is what the left did a number of decades ago. They went into the schools, all these sort of things. They did their propaganda for decades upon decades, changed a number of churches, changed a number that have gone completely woke and crazy, changed a number of institutions, in particular the education. That's what they targeted in particular, because they knew change the youth, change the society. Very smart on their part as a strategy. Conservatives, on the other hand, was live and let live. No. If somebody is undertaking cultural war against you, you need to undertake cultural warfare against them. If you don't, they will win. You will lose. And then you'll be in their re-education camp. Currently, you just have to take a look. Currently, it's a soft type of authoritarianism. It could get worse. It will get worse, to be honest. Just take a look at Jordan Peterson. You must go to this education thing and be re-educated on how you should be a good Canadian citizen. Or the new YouTube guidelines. Oh, we're not going to basically give you an immediate strike. We'll give you a warning. And then if you do the culturally appropriate videos to learn what our policies are and why you're wrong. Yes, comrade, Google. That's what we're heading towards. Guys, you need to pull your heads in. You need to basically stop being like ostriches with your head stuck in the ground saying, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to have anything to do with it, because it's not going to work. Because these crazies are not going to stop unless they're stopped. You need to get that through your heads. This is the world we're living in, unfortunately. You can see some of these people from Eastern Europe. They're going back to Eastern Europe. They're going, we've seen this before. It happened to us. We don't want to be part of it again. And it's happening now, in particular in the English-speaking countries. New Zealand, Australia, US, Canada, the UK, Ireland, in the primarily in the English-speaking countries it's happening. They are the spearhead of this agenda, this globalist agenda. It's because they were the main part of the globalist elite for a very long time. And so they are the ones that have actually developed these ideologies. And that's what I'm saying to you guys, that you have to wake up to yourselves. This is why Putin is doing what he's doing, because he's realized he can't negotiate with these crazies. These crazies want to destroy him. And unless he cripples them economically, politically, and militarily, he's not going to get them off his back. And it's the same thing with us. Unless we defeat them, we're not going to get them off our back. And they're going to get on our back so hard, you know, we'll all be basically in little re-education camps with little red books. Do you get it? Wake up to yourselves. Please do it soon, because, you know, we are losing the West. And we're talking about the Western values that we once had in our societies. And we're losing them fast. And the biggest culprits for this are those bloody boomers. That's who the biggest culprits are. Because they benefited, and they basically made a generation of woke, idiot children who they spoilt. And these people went to these university establishments and learned, because they were soft, and learnt all the bullshit. And now these weak individuals are just blabbing and pushing the same stuff. We've got weak men, in particular boomer mothers, who basically created weak men. That's the other thing we need to bring back. Masculine, strong men who've got bloody big balls and are willing to fight for a better future. That's why, you know, marriages have gone to hell. That's why the birth rate has gone to hell, and demographics are collapsing in the West. And that's another reason why they're trying to flood in with so many people from other parts, to deliberately dilute and all that, because it's much easier to control a population that's divided amongst themselves and not, you know, has not one consistent culture and all that. That's the other strategy of these globalists. This is what's happening, guys. It's happening now. And unless we pull our finger out and realize that this is happening, I mean, Putin and Xi, I suspect they had a few laughs about this, looking at the West and the mess. I mean, I would if I was in their position. I'd say, what a bunch of drongos. They're destroying themselves. You know, all we have to do is sit back and just let them do it to themselves. And I think that's what he's doing. Why put an effort? Why spend stupendous amounts? Why endanger more of your soldiers when these people are willing to kill themselves? You know, in terms of personnel, in terms of the Ukrainian personnel, in terms of, you know, treasure, weapons, military, you know, security, you know, they're just putting everything on the line. Okay, keep it going. You crazies, keep it going. You know, this is really what I believe is happening from a geopolitical position. But within the West, we've got this massive problem: the green lunacy, the plant-based lunacy, all these lunacies that are happening. The attack on agriculture, the attack on the population, the attack on, you know, even reproduction, everything, you know, it's on steroids. It's pretty much these people like Larry Fink, Bill Gates and all that, they think that they could be on the top of the pile, potentially evolve themselves into some basically cybernetic organism or whatever. You know, they got delusions like this, godlike delusions. And this is the sort of stuff. And then on top of that, they go, we don't need a lot of people, you know, we don't need a lot of feeders. Let's cull the herd, you know, give them kibble, destroy their families with cultural wars and stuff like that, and let's reduce their numbers to a manageable amount. And then we've got robots that can do our killing, automated drones and all sort of things. Have some of these dumb idiots control them and do our dirty work while we sit on top nice and pretty and control the whole globe. And it's just a constant war. We profiteer from this constant war against all our enemies. That's how they think, these people. These people are fascists in the traditional sense of a fascist, you know, where, you know, fascism is really where the financial elites with the government become one and work together in controlling everything and basically extracting as much as they can out of everything. They think they are the best, they are the master class, and they have the right to rule and extract as much as they can. That's how they believe. The strong, you know, this nihilistic Nietzschean type, you know, and a sort of also Darwinian sort of social Darwinism, which is illogical because no species fights amongst itself. It competes with other species, not within itself. So that's illogical. A species usually breeds amongst itself and grows and actually dominates its environment. That's the purpose. It's an adaptation. Even Darwin didn't believe in that nonsense. But anyway, that's for another day, all that sort of stuff. But these ideologies are just crazy ideologies. But it doesn't matter what they are, whether they are logical or not. The thing is, there's millions that believe them, and they're acting them out. And the rest of us that are sane, mentally sane, and understand this lunacy are pretty much sitting back and not being actively against these people. Got to make a choice. Are you going to sit back while the whole world gets swept away and these crazies take over completely? Or are we going to say no and start organising and protesting and trying to wake up other people? And there is a bit of resistance, even on the left, even people in the left, you know, around people like JFK Jr. Even they get it. They're starting to realise, they go, these people are crazy. The problem is we need to organise with them. So people that are like Trump conservatives with JFK people, we won't agree on everything. But you know what? If you don't get together to try and stop these crazies, you're never going to stop them. Because remember, well-organised minorities can still win. Bolsheviks in Russia, they were a minority, but they were well-organised. That's the difference. Remember that. Even when the elections happened in the initial Duma, and even when in the initial Soviets, let's go, once the Duma was overthrown and we had the October Revolution, and there was a call for all power to the Soviets, and there were elections in the Soviets, the Bolsheviks didn't win the majority of the votes. Actually, the social SREs, SR, yeah, Socialist Revolutionary, blah, blah, whatever they were, they actually won more votes because they got a lot of the peasant votes as well. So they actually did much better than the Bolsheviks. But the Bolsheviks were better, had more guns, had a bigger army, and were better organised and trained. Guess what? They won. So You've got to understand this. Those who are the best organised, most capable, they win, not the ones that are least organised, more disorganised, or whatever else. So obviously numbers count, but sometimes, good organisation counts even more. And you've got to coordinate with all the friendly forces, because if you don't have enough friendly forces, then you can be taken out. And what happens is, remember the old divide and rule? One little group, well organised, can take out one group, then the next group, then the next group, and the next group. But if all these groups are united and working together, that little group has a lot of resistance. And the resistance is much bigger than that little group. It's that little group that's going to lose out in any conflict, open conflict. That's when they avoid open conflict and trying to subvert and cause divisions. That's the other strategy. And you've got to be you've got to have leaders, hopefully, in this united sort of amalgam of people that realize this strategy and take measures to avoid these people being able to implement this strategy. These are all important things that need to be discussed within a movement and need to be discussed amongst people that you're working with, because you have to have certain goals. You have to say, we disagree a lot about things, but we do have common cause for a number of things. Lay them out and stick to them. Don't deviate. Don't undermine the other side that's collaborating with you just because you disagree with a few other things. It's fine if you disagree. I mean, even in families which are conservatives or religious or whatever, they're going to be disagreements. So you're going to have disagreements with people that you collaborate with for a common cause, but stick to the main objectives of that common cause, the main goals, and the main things that you're fighting against. Don't shit all over the whole thing, is what I'm trying to say, where one tries to dominate it, and then cause divisions, because they will be exploited by the other side. Keep that in mind. You may not be 100% agreeable with everyone. I mean, I had to work, I remember when I was a youngster and I was on the left, and I collaborated with a number of people in the peace movement and all that. There were people who came from certain alternative backgrounds, a bit more conservative, others who were, which I would be allied nowadays, but back then I wasn't. But at the same time, back then, the left was a bit more traditional left, not woke left like it is. It was old working class type left. So like probably the old Democratic Party of the 60s and 50s. We're talking about that sort of a different attitude. Nowadays, I don't want to have anything to do with them because they are so crazy, even in this country. So I'm pretty much on the conservative side of politics nowadays. Even though I don't agree with everything, I still vote primarily for smaller parties and people that are basically upset, that are opposed to this big agenda. As I said, you don't have to agree with everything. I don't, but at the same time, you need to work with people that are going to oppose these crazies, because unless we stop them, we're going to regret the world we're going to leave, that we're going to have to live in for a while before we die, and then the hell that we're going to leave for our kids and grandkids and for our society. I can't live with that. And that's why I'll continue combating against that and trying to get the message out and trying to inform you guys, because I know how, I understand these things, bring you up to date so you've got an understanding of what the hell's going on. But it starts with every single one of us, small steps. A lot of small steps can make a big difference. Remember that. Anyway, I'll leave it up there at that. Pretty much don't expect this war to stop anytime soon. The game's changed, and this is basically a war of attrition on all fronts: economic attrition, political attrition, influence attrition, geopolitical attrition, how much influence you could maintain by continuing this conflict, military attrition, and also even social attrition, because this is causing more problems within the society, fracturing, society, especially in the West. So it's an attrition on multiple levels and multiple fronts. This is what's happening. This is what going forward. Next year is going to be even worse. And there's going to be more people that will suffer and more people that will go hungry. In Western societies, it's going to be horrific. And there will be more people that will die from the cold in Northern Europe. So that's the future, guys. I know it's horrendous. If you could work from home and you can escape to the south of Europe, do it. If you can do it. If you can't, you got to find some sort of alternatives, whether you move into one place where you can bring more of your assets and money together within a family, to support each other and lower your cost. Because if you've basically got more people living into, let's say, a bigger home as an example, and you've got your grandparents and your parents and yourselves, in one household, your costs are going to be lower and your income is going to be higher, and that's going to give you a much better ability to survive, for all of us to survive, and to basically for things to be less worse. At least you'll probably save your grandparents from dying from the cold, but also from many others suffering in the family. So I think people need to start making different plans, especially in Europe. This is going to be worse in Europe than it's going to be in North America or Australasia. But around, things are getting hard everywhere. Even in countries that are outside the West, things are getting hard because inflation is biting across the board everywhere. So nobody can really escape it. Even in Russia now, I've heard stories that inflation has gone up, and goods and stuff and services have also gone slightly up. It's not as bad because they've still got a lot of energy, a lot of cheap energy, and a lot of cheap resources. But it is going to bite everywhere to different levels, but it's still going to bite everywhere. And people need to start considering all these sort of things, considering sort of trying to scale down a bit, trying to basically, and I know the system wants you to do that to some extent, but you're forced to it, and those arse-hats know it, but at the same time, you are forced to scale down slightly because, otherwise you're going to lose even more. So you've got to find some way of supporting yourself. And I mean, the other way is, if you go into one big home, immediately you may liberate one or two other homes which you can rent out. That's an additional income source for that household. So there's a lot of things like that. You've got to start, even for your family, thinking outside the box. You can't think in the traditional way anymore. And I mean, it's not a bad thing. I mean, let's not forget, if you go back 200 years or 100 years or whatever, there were extended families living in the same household. That was normal. So it's not a thing that is actually living apart like we do today is a bit less normal than the past. In the past, it was one household. You'd have the grandparents, the parents, and the kids living under the same roof. That was more traditional back then, rather than, or in a tribal group, multiple generations living in the same huts or in the same little village. So, so that's the normal thing. So don't consider it's, abnormal. It's the normal thing. It actually gives you strength in numbers coming together, and you're pulling your resources together. That means it makes you more viable. It increases your capacity to survive in these difficult times. So think it differently. The system tries to divide you, tries to keep you lonely, separated, away from each other, from other humans. It sort of pushes your narcissistic temptations. It encourages these behaviors, these antisocial behaviors, drinking, smoking, excessively, doing all these antisocial behaviors and all that, and also living alone, not having any to do with anyone else. It's part of that agenda that society pushes, and it pushes it for one simple reason, because by keeping you separate like that, they can extract more wealth from more people. Same reason why they printed more money to force women into the workforce. And most women have never liked it. They'd prefer to have kids and all that, but they've been sold this bullshit. Their life is a life of being a spinster, no kids, and unhappy. Most of them are unhappy. I find a lot of middle-aged women that have never really built anything other than their career, and they're unhappy. They've got nothing. And they know it down deep. They hate their life. You don't get happiness from trinkets. You can have all the trinkets in the world, they're not going to make you happy. There's a lot of lonely, depressed people that have got a lot of money, believe me. So you don't see poor people that have got a really strong social network committing suicide. It's really lonely people, and it doesn't matter how much money they've got, that are committing suicide. Another way to depopulate the population, all part of the same strategy, I suspect. But destroying communities, part of the way these arseheads are able to control people. And the uber consumerism, where you must have the latest iPhone. God, shock horror if you don't. I mean, I used to fall into that as well. I used to go and buy the latest Samsung phone and pay $1,000 and all that. And I realized, and after my operation and all that sort of stuff, and having a new enlightened perspective about life and the way I view life and changed, I realized why, all this nonsense. And so pretty much I jettisoned that. Now I usually have a phone that I'll buy a phone anywhere between $600-700, and it's a mid-range phone. It's pretty good. It does what I need and all that. And I usually keep it for about 3, sometimes even 4 years before I replace it. I don't replace it every year like I used to. Because at the end of the day, what do I need it for? I need to, check a few things on it for my social media, my channel, obviously, my emails, make a few phone calls or send some SMS. It's not as if I need it for any other stuff. Maybe take a few snapshots. Most things nowadays are pretty good at that level. So, yeah, I think all of us need to start thinking about life a bit differently. And we can learn a lot from our ancestors, our grandparents, and people like that, and their wisdom and how they lived and how life was. And we can learn a lot to basically say to these propagandists and arseheads that are trying to push their insular modernity in these super cities and stuff like that, and 15-minute cities and whatever else, and everybody in their little cage with their kibble and immersed in their little meta life or whatever. You know, that's what they're trying to push us into. You know, depopulate us and push us into that sort of like a matrix type thing, which they control completely. So they can basically just, you know, even exploit us on a psychological level, or put devices in us, all sorts of things. There's an army of people waiting to put this sort of shit in them. You know, that's how crazy it is, how brainwashed they are. And that's why I'm saying we need to arrest this. And it starts with our families, reorganizing our own families, and our families and friends playing a big role, proactive role in the way we influence them and break them from that matrix, softly, not crazy, you know, like the crazies. You got to put into people's minds the contradictions, the obvious contradictions. Just lay them out, let them think about the stuff, and they'll come back and they'll ask other things, and then you'll get into a bit of a conversation over time, and slowly but surely they'll shift. Softly. That's how it works. Because remember, people that have been heavily brainwashed through social media, the TV, all these sort of institutions, education institutions and all that, you know, it takes a lot to shift them. There are mavericks in society that are always suspicious about things, like me. I'm a maverick generally. I just don't trust any. I've always, you know, what's in it for you? You know, what's your angle? But I've got that personality. You know, I'm a sort of a maverick. 99% of the population are not like that. They're just sheep. Bah! They'll follow somebody and all that. The thing is, you need to point out that they're following the wrong thing. And once they realize and start questioning that, they go, why am I following that? Then they're more willing to follow something different. Got it? So small steps, you know, you got to be careful the way you influence that. Otherwise, then you end up in a very frictious, where you're the crackpot and they are following the normal, which they think is normal, the propaganda. So to allow them to escape the matrix of this crazy world, we need to softly shift them and show them that there are better ways of actually living and many other things. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this video in terms of your own life. I wanted to bring it back to people's lives, not just talk about the geopolitics, the high-end stuff between Putin, China, and the West, because that's an important thing. But below that, there are a whole lot of other dynamics which affect us directly. So what's happening there affects us down here, and vice versa, because if we create enough movement and potential opposing these crazy, Fabian socialists that are running the show in the West, we knock them off their pedestal politically, because we have organized our families and our communities to get rid of them. Then we can actually reorientate ourselves and potentially come to some treaty, global treaty, like in the past, where there was after the Second World War, there was certain arrangements that happened. We could probably achieve something similar with Russia and China and diffuse a lot of the global tension between us. And then the nice thing, you know what happens? Russia and China go back to their old localized rivalries that they've always had, which means that they shift apart to some extent. They will weaken themselves because we will no longer be a threat to either one of them existential. And so you'll end up with an improved balance rather than actually being on the back foot, so to speak. So there are a lot of advantages, but you've got to be thinking smart. Anyway, that's it. See yous.